The first photo seemed normal, or so it appeared at first. Lucas Tan, a junior at Eastwood University, was a known tech enthusiast. His ability to sniff out great deals in second-hand markets was practically legendary. This time, his eye caught on what seemed to be an incredible find, a nearly new iPhone 12 Pro Max, still in its box, priced at a shockingly low $200. A barely used iPhone for only $200? Lucas muttered to himself, his brow furrowing. The phone was pristine in the photos, not a scratch or scuff. The seller claimed they had upgraded and wanted to sell it fast. Despite his nagging skepticism, the price was just too good to pass up. That evening, Lucas met the seller in a dimly lit corner of a rundown cafe. The man wore a hood and seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "Here," he grunted, shoving the phone into Lucas's hands. The transaction was over in a matter of seconds, with only the faintest smell of cigarette smoke lingering as the man hurried away into the night. Lucas returned to his dorm, marveled at the phone's condition, and began transferring his apps and contacts. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until he used the camera for the first time. It was at a friend's party over the weekend. The music pulsed, and the room buzzed with laughter and conversation. Lucas, eager to test out his new phone, took it out to capture the moment. As he pointed the camera at the dancing crowd, something in the lens felt off, like a faint shadow in the background. Brushing it off as a trick of the light, he snapped a few photos and didn't think much of it. But when he reviewed the images later that night, his blood ran cold. In every picture, somewhere in the background, stood a boy, no older than 7, with pale skin, messy hair, and hollow, vacant eyes. In some photos, the boy was standing at the far edges of the frame, barely visible. In others, he appeared directly behind his friends, though none of them seemed to notice him at the time. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he zoomed in on the boy. He hadn't seen any children at the party, and this boy, he was certain, hadn't been there. The next day, Lucas tried to rationalize the eerie images. Maybe it was a glitch in the phone's software, or a strange reflection from the lighting. After all, it was a second-hand phone. Maybe the previous owner had left some kind of odd residue in the camera's memory. He snapped a few more photos around campus, of his textbooks, his roommates, even the busy cafeteria. But the boy appeared again, in every picture, standing just beyond the main focus of the shot, his eyes always staring straight into the lens. Lucas began to feel a creeping sense of dread. Deleting the photos did nothing. They would return, each time with the boy looking more distressed, more desperate, as if crying out for help. As the days passed, Lucas's life was consumed by the ghostly presence in his phone. He avoided using the camera, but it seemed the phone had other plans. It would randomly light up in the dead of night, the screen flashing with images of the boy, now standing in dark, shadowy places, his face etched with silent screams. More disturbingly, sometimes Lucas thought he could hear faint whispers emanating from the phone when he was alone, like the distant voice of a child, barely audible, begging for something Lucas couldn't understand. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Lucas dug through the phone's history. He scoured the internet for any information, any trace of the boy. After hours of searching, he stumbled upon a string of old news articles from 5 years ago. There it was, a missing boy, a photo to match. His name was Ethan, and he had disappeared without a trace one summer evening while playing in a park. Despite exhaustive efforts by the authorities, no one ever found him. The case had gone cold, and his grieving parents had since moved away, leaving behind only the chilling memory of their lost child. Lucas's heart sank as he read the details. But something felt wrong. There had to be more. He needed to know where this phone had come from, and more importantly, why it was haunted by the image of this boy. Through a series of online inquiries, Lucas tracked down the original seller, an elusive man who had been involved in various shady dealings. This man had purchased the phone from a pawn shop, and the pawn shop owner, in turn, had acquired it from an estate sale. And that was when Lucas discovered the true horror behind the device. The phone had once belonged to a man named Richard Hastings, a reclusive individual with a dark history. Hastings had lived on the fringes of town, keeping mostly to himself, but rumors had circulated about his involvement in the disappearances of several children over the years, including Ethan's. Hastings had never been convicted, though his name had been repeatedly mentioned in connection with the unsolved cases. Despite numerous investigations, no hard evidence had ever surfaced, and Hastings remained a free man until his sudden death a year ago. He had died alone in his decrepit house under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind little more than rumors and fear. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but there was one more crucial detail Lucas had yet to uncover: Hastings' motive. Lucas reached out to a retired detective who had worked on the Ethan case. The detective, named William Crane, had long since given up on finding answers, but something about Lucas's story intrigued him. Together, they dug through old case files, looking for any clue that might explain why Hastings had targeted Ethan and the other children. They soon uncovered a disturbing pattern. Hastings had always been obsessed with photography. He was known in the local community as a hobbyist photographer, often capturing images of the surrounding nature and town life. But hidden among his scenic landscapes were dozens of photos of children, unassuming, everyday shots of kids playing in the park, walking to school, or riding their bikes. None of the children seemed aware they were being photographed. The deeper they went, the more they realized that Hastings' photography hobby had masked something far darker. He had been stalking his victims long before they disappeared, documenting their daily lives and studying them. Ethan had been one of those children. Hastings' fascination with Ethan went beyond casual interest. Through journal entries they found in Hastings' house, Lucas and Crane uncovered the twisted mind of the man. Hastings believed that by capturing a child's image at just the right moment, he could somehow trap their essence, keeping a part of them with him forever. He wrote obsessively about the power of photography, convinced that the lens of a camera could steal more than just a person's likeness. It could steal their soul. It was then that Lucas fully understood the phone's dark power. Ethan's soul had been trapped in the phone when Hastings took his photo. And Ethan was not alone. As they continued to investigate Hastings' life, they found evidence linking him to more missing children. In every case, there had been photographs, photos taken just before the children disappeared. Hastings' obsession with control, power, and immortality had driven him to kidnap and, eventually, kill his victims, believing that by doing so, he could hold on to them forever. Lucas's stomach churned as the full scope of Hastings' crimes came to light. Hastings had used the phone to take Ethan's photo, binding the boy's spirit to the device. And now, years after Hastings' death, Ethan's soul remained trapped, unable to move on, calling out for help through the phone's camera. Driven by a sense of urgency, Lucas and Crane returned to Hastings' abandoned house. In the hidden basement room, they found a collection of cameras, photos, and a small locked chest. Inside the chest were keepsakes from the missing children, a worn-out toy truck, a stuffed animal, a bracelet. Ethan's toy truck was among them. The phone buzzed in Lucas's pocket, and for the first time, when he looked at the screen, the boy in the photos smiled. With the evidence they had gathered, Crane was able to finally bring closure to Ethan's case and expose the full extent of Hastings' evil deeds. Hastings had died before justice could catch up to him, but in his death, the truth was finally revealed. The souls of the children, including Ethan, were freed. The phone stopped buzzing after that. Lucas, shaken but relieved, smashed the device, ensuring no other soul would be trapped in its lens again. But as Lucas walked away from Hastings' house for the final time, a chilling thought crept into his mind. What if there were other objects out there, still tied to Hastings' victims? What if other phones, cameras, or even old toys were still carrying the dark remnants of his twisted obsession? Somewhere, in the darkest corners of the world, what if another phone was waiting for its next owner? It was just supposed to be another upgrade. When Sarah Lee walked into the store to trade in her old phone, she didn't think much of it. Her iPhone 7 had served her well, but it was time for something new, something faster. The salesman was friendly enough, walking her through the shiny displays of the latest models. But then she saw it, a sleek, midnight black iPhone 12, resting on the counter in a refurbished section. It was perfect, practically new, no visible scratches, and for a fraction of the cost of the latest models. It seemed like a steal. "Is this one available?" she asked the salesman, who hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It's a return, but everything's been reset to factory settings," he said. "It's in great condition. You sure you don't want something newer, though?" Sarah shook her head. "This one's perfect." She left the store feeling pleased with her choice, admiring the smooth feel of the phone in her hand. That evening, after transferring all her apps and contacts, Sarah settled down in her apartment to explore the phone. It worked flawlessly. Everything was in perfect order, just as promised. But as she scrolled through the settings, she noticed something odd, a voicemail notification from an unknown number. Her first instinct was to delete it. She hadn't given her number to anyone since getting the phone, and no one had had time to leave her a message. But curiosity got the better of her. When she opened the voicemail, it was nothing but static at first. Then came the faint sound of someone breathing, slow, deliberate, and unsettling. Sarah frowned and held the phone closer to her ear. As the breath continued, there was a whisper, almost too quiet to hear, a single word: "Help." Sarah's pulse quickened. She played the message again, but this time it was just static. Convinced it was some kind of glitch or prank, she shook her head and deleted the voicemail, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had settled over her. But the next morning, it was back. Another voicemail from the same unknown number. Sarah hesitated before playing it. Again, it was static, but this time, the breathing was more labored, more frantic. The same voice came through, clearer now, whispering two words: "Find me." Her heart thudded in her chest. She quickly deleted the message, now more unnerved than ever. She considered returning the phone, but dismissed the thought. It was probably just some random error with the voicemail system. No need to overreact. But the calls didn't stop. Over the next few days, Sarah continued to receive voicemail after voicemail from the same number. Each time, the voice became clearer, more desperate. Sometimes there were sobs, other times just whispers, but the message was always the same: "Help me. Find me." Then, the phone calls started. It was late one night when Sarah's phone rang. The number was still unknown. She hesitated, staring at the screen, her stomach twisting in knots. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, there was only silence on the other end. Then, the static returned, accompanied by that same chilling breath. And then the voice again. "You have to help me." Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The response was barely audible, but she could make out three words: "They're coming soon." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah sitting in the dark, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She felt cold all over. Who was this? What did they want from her? She blocked the number, hoping that would put an end to the terror. But the next night, it rang again, this time from a different number. The same voice, the same chilling message. And now, there was something else. Whispers in the background, Other voices, crying, pleading, begging for release. Unable to sleep, Sarah decided to do some digging. She searched the internet for anything that could explain what was happening, but nothing seemed to fit. Finally, out of desperation, she traced the history of the phone, using the serial number to look up previous owners. What she found left her frozen in terror. The phone had belonged to a young woman named Emily Hartley, who had gone missing 6 months ago. Her body had never been found, but her disappearance had been widely reported in the news. There were rumors, dark, chilling rumors, that she had been abducted by a cult operating in the city. Several other women had also vanished around the same time, all under similarly mysterious circumstances. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the articles. Was Emily the one who had been calling her? But how? And why? The next voicemail came that very night. But this time, it wasn't static. "I'm trapped," the voice whispered. "They're coming for you too." Sarah's blood ran cold. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't the only one. There were more, trapped somewhere, their voices reaching out through the phone. Somehow, they had become bound to the device, caught in an endless loop of fear and desperation. Frantic, Sarah reached out to the police, explaining everything, but they dismissed her claims, writing it off as stress or paranoia. No one believed her. She was on her own. The calls grew more frequent, the voices more insistent. Sometimes, Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night to find her phone ringing on its own, the screen glowing eerily in the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more menacing, as if the trapped souls were running out of time. And then, one night, everything changed. Sarah was lying in bed, trying desperately to fall asleep, when the phone rang again. But this time, when she answered, there was no whispering, there was no static. Instead, she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching slowly from the other end of the line. She sat up, her heart pounding, listening in terror as the footsteps grew louder and louder. "Who's there?" she gasped into the phone, but no one responded. The footsteps stopped abruptly, followed by a low, rumbling voice. "They're here." The call ended with a click, leaving Sarah in absolute silence. But it didn't last long. A soft knock echoed from her front door, followed by another, more insistent one. Her phone buzzed in her hand, vibrating with new voicemails, but she didn't dare look. The knock came again, louder this time, more forceful. "They're here," the voice from the phone had said. Her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah slowly crept toward the door, her legs trembling. She peered through the peephole, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing just outside, bathed in the dim glow of the hallway light, were 3 figures dressed in black robes, their faces hidden in shadow. They had come for her.